one and all, I'm Alexis, aka The Soft Reader, and I'm here today to do my June wrap-up. So in the month of June, I was only reading queer books, except for one, and I ended up reading 11 books and DNFing 2, so this is probably going to be a long wrap-up, so let's just go ahead and get into it. Starting with the books I DNF'd, the first of which was Saco Girls by Claire Legrand. I do have an arc of this. This comes out in October. I made it about 100 pages into this. I was doing a buddy read with some friends of mine, and this one just didn't work for me. My biggest complaint about this book is that it has the weirdest pacing I've ever read in a book, honestly. It reads a lot like a TV show where sometimes things happen back to back, but you're missing a lot of stuff that happens in between, and it doesn't always make logical sense to go from one scene to the next. And it felt like a lot of stuff was happening in the background that we were just supposed to infer, which I didn't really enjoy, and the characters were making connections that just didn't logically make sense for them to make, and I just really wasn't enjoying it, so I decided to DNF it. The second book I DNF'd in June was one I made it 70% of the way through and just decided I didn't want to read anymore, and that was Whole Metal Girls by Emily Skratsky. This was a huge disappointment for me. This came down to I just didn't enjoy the main characters. One of the characters I started off liking, and then over the course of the novel she just made less and less sense to me, and she just really didn't have any personality. And then the other main character was just super elitist and super classist, and she was just honestly really rude to every other character, and it was kind of insufferable to read her point of view, and it just wasn't going fast enough for what I was wanting the story. I mean, it took over like 50% for anything to happen, and it just wasn't really working for me. And not liking the characters and not really liking any of the other characters either, there really wasn't anything other than the diversity for me to stay. It does have a lot of really awesome diversity, but that just wasn't enough to keep me hooked, unfortunately. Alright, now moving into the books I actually did start and finish, starting with my least favorite, which is going to be a very unpopular opinion. That was We Are the Ants by Sean David Hutchinson. I ended up giving this one a 3 stars, and this one just ultimately was a whole lot of meh for me. I really disliked the first 200 pages. Like, I contemplated why I was still reading, and then I really enjoyed the next 100 pages, and then I really disliked the ending. My biggest complaint I kind of have with this book is that there is so much going on. Because there were all of these different plot points with his deceased ex-boyfriend, the aliens, the stuff going on with his brother, the stuff going on with his grandmother, the stuff going on with the bullies at school, the stuff going on with the new boy at school, the stuff going on with the ex-best friend. It was so much, and there was so many times that it felt like it lacked cohesion. I felt like I was reading 4 or 5 different books at one time, and it was really overwhelming, and it kind of made it to where I couldn't get really emotionally attached to pretty much anything happening, because as soon as I would be getting into something, we'd immediately be on to the next like emotional thing, and I don't know, it didn't work for me. I can see why other people love this book, but it just, the way it was written and all came together just wasn't successful for me. The next book I'm going to mention is Under the Udala Trees by Chinelo Okparanta, and I ended up giving this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I do think this is a really good novel, especially because I feel like there are so few stories that we get about the queer community out of Africa, and I do feel like that's such a unique and important part of the community that we don't get to see stories of very often. So for that reason, I do highly recommend checking this novel out. Ultimately, this ends up being a story about one woman, and I really liked that about how it kind of goes through her life and her experiences as a queer woman. But I also felt like at the end of this book, so many things weren't wrapped up enough for me. I had a lot of questions about the people she had kind of met over the course of her life, and I was like, cool, well, what happened to this person? What ended up happening to this? Ultimately, it didn't wrap up quite the way I would have liked, and I know that that's more realistic for it not to wrap up, but it's also like sometimes I read books and I want things to wrap up nicely, and I found that that was definitely what I wanted with this book. The next one I read was actually the first of 2 books by this author I read this month, and that was We Are Okay by Nina Lepore, and I think I'm gonna end up giving this one a 3.5 as well. This is a very short book, and I definitely think this book could have done with a little bit more length in working out kind of the ending. This is another one where it's very open-ended, and that was pretty unsatisfying for me. And I also wish that the ending would have been explained a little bit more than just mental illness. That was kind of just the blanket ending that it got, and I think the subject deserved a little bit more time than that. I will say, however, that as someone who has grieved a loved one, very similar to how Marin is grieving in this book has one of the best depictions of grief I've ever read. Like I said, as someone who has very similarly felt the way that Marin has, this book has a beautiful portrayal of grief. But all of that aside, I did have a lot of problems with the ending and how open-ended it was, but it definitely made me interested to read other Nina LaCour works in the future, which I literally did in June. So the next one I'm going to mention is another one I'm going to give, I think, 3.5 stars to, and that is Of Fire and Stars by Audrey Coulthurst. Really enjoyed the romance in this one, and the romance in this one is very slow burn, and I really liked that. I really liked watching the two main characters, Mare and Denna, fall in love over the course of the book. It really worked for me, and I really did like both Mare and Denna. I thought that they were both very nice characters. They both had their own feelings and their own struggles and their own dreams, and I think that came across really well. The two areas where I feel like this book was not successful was in the world building. The world building did feel very YA Fantasy 101. I ended up having a lot of questions about how the world worked and questions about the lore and stuff, and I was like, cool, you know, if you're gonna put this stuff in here, like, explain it to me, you know, let me learn about it. And that really didn't happen. There was a lot of things that felt, like I said, pretty basic. The plot as well felt very basic. It was very predictable for me. The big mystery twist at the end, I think I saw coming from the first like 10 chapters, so it wasn't wowing me in terms of plot. I think the real strong point and the real unique point of the series is that it is about two princesses falling in love, and I do think it's a good read for that reason, because we don't get to have that every day, and it's nice. The next one I'm going to mention is All Out, which is a queer anthology edited by Sandra Mitchell, and I think all of my individual ratings for these end up averaging out to a 3.6. I will leave my Goodreads review linked down below, which is where I actually reviewed every story as I read them, but I will tell you guys now that my favorite stories were Roja by Anna Marie McLemore, Burnt Umber by Mackenzie Lee, Molly's Lips by Dahlia Adler, Every Shade of Red by Elliot Wake was my favorite story. That was a trans Robin Hood retelling, and I would read a 600-page book if Elliot Wake wants to write that, because it was so good. I also liked The Secret Life of a Teenage Boy by Alex Sanchez and The Inferno and the Butterfly by Sean David Hutchinson. There were definitely some really strong stories in this. A bunch of stories I feel like I would read whole stories, like whole novels about. The next thing I'm going to read is actually a novella I read, and that was The Melody of You and Me by M. Hollis, which features a pansexual main character, which was so excited. It also features a Filipino lesbian love interest. So good. This was so enjoyable. I gave it 4 stars. It gave me a lot of feelings about the girls and the relationship and the fact that it was a pansexual main character. You know, it's a novella, so it's really, really quick. It kind of does develop very fast. And another thing I do want to talk about this one is that I see a lot of people rate this book really low because of the writing in it. And I want to say 2 things about that. One, this book is written by a woman who's originally Brazilian, her first language being Portuguese, and she wrote this book in English. It's not a translated work, she wrote it in English, which is hella impressive. I speak a second language, and I could never have written a book that good in my second language. No way. So the writing is super impressive for that fact, but also I've read books written in English that are 10 times worse than this novella is. So I see people being really harsh on Goodreads about how the writing is in this book, and I feel like it's supremely uncalled for how harsh people are about the writing in this book. So I just wanted to give my 2 cents in about that one. The next book I read was another one by Nina LaCour, and that was Everything Leads to You, and I ended up giving this one a 4 stars as well. I had a great time reading this. I really enjoyed the main character, Emmy. I really enjoyed how much the film industry played a part in this, which is exactly what I wanted out of this story. I wanted a story heavy on film, and that is what I got. This book made me like emotional, this book made me laugh, this book made me frustrated, and I feel like the main character in this book did a lot of developing. Over the course of the book, she kind of realized a lot of things about herself and about, you know, the people around her, especially the love interest in this book, and kind of how she felt about the love interest, and I really appreciated that. There were just a couple of little things here and there that didn't make this a 5-star. I understand the point of this book is that the main character does see the love interest as kind of a Mary Sue, but that didn't negate the fact that the love interest was kind of a Mary Sue, which was a little annoying. And also, a lot of the stuff in this book was a little ridiculous. These were 17-year-old kids who were literally just driving to strangers' houses, and I was like, no, that is how you end up dead. So it was just a couple little things here and there, like I said, that were a little ridiculous that I couldn't give this one 5 stars, but I still immensely enjoyed it. The next book I read was Running with Lions by Julian Winters, which was one I was so excited to read this month. You guys know I am a huge fan of sports, and so I always get really nervous when there are sports stories because I'm always like, oh no, what if it's not good? But I have to say, I really enjoyed Running with Lions. I did give it 4 stars because there was not enough sports for me personally. I wish there had been more, you know. And then there was a side romance that I personally wasn't a fan of, and I kind of didn't like the way it was framed. But I loved the main romance, and I loved the main character, Sebastian, so much. He was such a disaster bisexual. He gave me so much secondhand embarrassment that I had to like stop reading sometimes because I was like, Sebastian, please. And it was really enjoyable. This book is very cheesy, and a lot of the stuff that happens is very like rom-com 101, but it was fun, and I really enjoyed the main character, and I really enjoyed the Muslim Pakistani English love interest, Amir. He was super sassy, but I also loved it when he would get all flirty with Sebastian. It was just really enjoyable. I highly recommend checking this one out, and I would love to see what else Julian Winters is going to write in the future, because this one was a load of fun. The next book I'm going to mention is Tequila Kingdom by Alexandra Christo. This was a book I did not expect to enjoy as much as I did. I ended up giving this one a 4.5 stars, and I really, really enjoyed this. I thought the world showed a lot of promise. There was a lot about it that wasn't quite well developed, but enough of it was developed to like make me want to know more, and I absolutely adored the 2 main characters, Eliane and Lyra, and I loved their hate-to-lovers romance, probably one of the best hate-to-lovers romances I've ever read, and I loved the element of like Siren hunting Prince and Princess Siren, and they like have to become allies of circumstance. You guys know I love that trope. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed this. The ending was pretty lackluster. It was kind of like the climax happened and it was like, it was almost a little too Disney for my tastes, but everything else about this was really good. Highly recommend the audiobook, and I'm really, really interested to read other things by Alexandra Christo in the future as well. The next book I'm going to mention was George by Alex Gino, and this is a middle grade story about our trans main character, and this was so cute. I gave this one 5 stars, and my main thing that I loved about this book is that this book has a very strong message, but it's so obviously written for kids. Like, its target audience is kids, and it's written in a way that's so easily understandable for kids, for people who are George's age, and it's still really funny, and it's still really emotional for them, and I loved that. I just respect that Alex Gino constantly kept sight of the audience in mind with George, and that made it so much more fun and so much more endearing, and I recommend everybody check this book out. It's only like 200 pages. You can read it in a day, and it's so cute. Coming up on my favorite book of the month, honestly, I may film an entire review on this book because I have a lot of thoughts, and this wrap-up is already long enough, and I don't feel like I can fit everything in it here. So if you guys do want to see me review this book, let me know. But my favorite book of the month, a book I gave 5 stars to, was Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. I adored everything about this book. I enjoyed the diversity in it. Our main character, Frances, is bisexual, and she's Ethiopian and English. The other main character, Aled, is demisexual, which was so awesome to see represented, and there's also other queer characters littered throughout this book. This is a book that's biggest emphasis is on friendship, is on this incredible platonic love that Frances and Aled have for each other. And I feel like we don't get enough books about friendship this strong in YA, and it's incredible. Like, if you have a best friend, you'll read this book and you'll connect to the friendship that Aled and Frances have with each other. But I also think this book has such a strong and beautiful message about college and about deciding what you want to do with your life after you finish school, and deciding who you are, and learning that you are going to change as a person, and that's okay. Another really strong part of this book is how we deal with trauma, and that every person deals with trauma differently, and that there's no one right way to deal with trauma. And I love everything about this book. Like, I am so serious. I could probably make a 10-minute review on how much I loved this book, and I totally will if you guys want me to. But this book was everything that every other person told me it would be, and I'm so glad I read it. I guess I should say thank you to Rami, because pretty much she hypes this book up. This is one of her favorite books. So thank you, Rami. I'm glad I finally read this on your recommendation. But I absolutely adored this book. It was my favorite book of June. It will be one of my favorite books of the year. It's one of my new all-time favorite books in general. I just loved it immensely. Alrighty guys, so that is my June wrap-up. I know this is a really long video, much longer than I try. I feel like I was talking really fast because I knew this was going to be very long, but I'm really happy with reading 11 books in the month. I probably could have read more if I wouldn't have had the 2 GNFs, but I'm really happy with how this month is gone. I hope I can keep that forward momentum through the rest of the year. Please tell me what your favorite and possibly least favorite book of June was. If you like what I do, I upload videos on Monday, Wednesdays, and Saturdays, and I'll see you guys soon with another one. Bye!